Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1236 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today we'll be speaking with Libby, who 28 years ago was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes around 13 years old. Libby's done a fair amount of counseling, and she's going to talk about that, her new coping skills, her life with Control IQ, and much more on this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Please don't forget that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. drinkag1.com/juicebox. Guys, I need you on this. T1dexchange.org/juicebox. You're a U.S. resident who has type 1 or is the caregiver of someone with type 1. I need you to take that survey at T1dexchange.org/juicebox. You are literally going to help move type 1 diabetes research forward. T1dexchange.org/juicebox. Take you like 10 minutes. I appreciate it very much. Today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Dexcom, makers of the Dexcom G7 and G6 continuous glucose monitoring systems. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Omnipod and the Omnipod 5. Learn more and get started today at omnipod.com/juicebox.
Hi, my name is Libby. I guess I've been type 1 for 28 years. Mm-hmm. I'm currently on a Dexcom G6 and a tandem T-Slim X2 with Control IQ.
Oh, excellent.
And I love it.
Let me write that down. I got Control IQ. You going to move to the G7 at some point? G6?
I hope so. I just got a brand new G6 transmitter like a month ago, so I have to go through that. You know, I would hate to waste supplies. So,
isn't it funny how something that you love so much, the minute they put out something new, you're like, I'm stuck with this G6 transmitter for 3 months.
Yep.
Can you imagine my life? It's terrible. No, that's excellent. How long have you been using Control IQ?
Pretty much since it was released to the general public. I believe, if I remember correctly, I was part of like the beta testing group.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I freaking love it. Because, you know, having diabetes for so long, it just gets so tiring and overwhelming and just, you know, you just want a vacation.
Listen, we jumped right in because you're short on time. So let me just ask you a couple of fast questions to orient my mind. Yeah. And I know you probably said half of this already, but don't judge me. How old are you?
I just turned 41 in December.
How old were you when you got diabetes?
I was technically 12. It was 2 weeks before my 13th birthday.
I'm going to say 13. Any other family members have type 1?
No, I am the only one in my entire family history.
Okay. Any other autoimmune issues in you or the family?
I've got hypothyroidism. Mm-hmm. My mom has that as well. Mm-hmm. My dad was diagnosed type 2 later in life.
Gotcha.
And my oldest brother has had kind of an on and off type 2 diagnosis. It's very weird for him. And we are assuming that my dad's mom was undiagnosed type 2, but that's really it.
That's where it lies. Celiac, no. People have trouble digesting food.
Nope.
Bipolar.
We have all the other health stuff, just nothing.
Oh, well, hold on.
Nothing metabolic.
Is there any bipolar in the family?
My mom and I joke that there's undiagnosed bipolar and depression and all of that stuff running around in our family, but no actual clinical diagnoses.
Yeah, sometimes hard to get a diagnosis.
It is.
And you are on the show today because?
I wanted to talk about mental health specifically related to diabetes.
All right. Well, you're in the right place. Libby?
I hope so.
Libby. There's no way that's not going to be the episode title because all your name makes me think of is that commercial.
Oh, the vegetables? Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Libby on the label. That's it, right? Label.
Yep, yeah.
No. So you're going to have to say something pretty out of there to for this not to be called that. We'll find out.
That's fine.
Yeah. All right. So mental health and type 1, what's your finding?
I'll start off with saying I was never opposed to going to therapy or counseling or any of that. I was never that person who's like, oh, counseling's wrong or it's evil or, it's not godly or whatever. People say so many things about mental health that, because you're in therapy, there's something seriously wrong with you. That's not at all the case. I've never been in that camp.
Libby, hold your thought. I have a question. I'm so sorry. I'm jumping in. You're 20 seconds into your thought. Where are you from? Vaguely.
I am currently living in Virginia, but I'm originally from Massachusetts.
You've heard people say that therapy is not godly?
Yes. I won't mention specifically who, but there are people close to me that have said, not in those exact words, but they are very, I'll say religious, and they are very much of the pray it away kind of mentality.
Jesus saves. Put your faith in Jesus, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that can't happen, but I also believe in science and medicine.
I'm going to ask you, did you try praying it away?
Oh, there are certainly times I have literally prayed and cried to all of the gods everywhere. Anything that could help me, please take this away. I need a vacation, even just taking it away for a week. But I have yet to get my week vacation. So Buddha
did not send you a prescription for anything?
No, unfortunately
Wouldn't
not.
Wouldn't that be amazing if you prayed and a prescription for happiness fell out of the sky?
Wouldn't it?
And then you'd be like, I don't know where to get this filled. My insurance doesn't cover it.
Yeah.
Never mind. Okay. That struck me strangely. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. Totally. Continue on.
So I have gone through burnout twice in my, year since diagnosis. And mostly that was in high school. So I was still fairly new to diabetes. I'd had diabetes by the time I got to high school for about 5 to 7 years. Mm-hmm. And then again, it was kind of like end of college / becoming a real adult. And everything was so overwhelming to me. And the third time I saw burnout approaching me, I was like, if I don't get help this time, I'm going to end up in the hospital or dead. That's how my burnout had been in the past. I stopped caring about myself. I wouldn't dose for carbohydrates. I wouldn't even look at any food labels. I would just shove food in my face and be like, I'll pay with it later. I'll dose later for it. I'll deal with how I feel about it afterwards.
Conscious thoughts while you're eating? Consciously, I know this is going to screw me up. I don't care.
Honestly, no. It's just like there were times where I was like, I'm just angry at everything. I want to eat this. I was a very emotional eater. Mm-hmm. And I had no coping skills or tools to use to steer me, not necessarily away from food, but dealing with those feelings of anger and frustration and anxiety. And why does my life suck so bad? Why do I have this disease? It's just, nobody wants this.
Did you have any of that before the diagnosis?
No, honestly, I had a really happy childhood. I was very athletic. I had a very supportive household. I grew up with 2 parents and 2 older brothers. I had pets. I had a lot of friends, did a lot of extracurriculars. So diabetes didn't necessarily put a stop to those things, but it made them more complicated.
What do you think, looking back on those first 5 years through high school and then through college, the next 4, what was going on with your management that made diabetes so difficult? Was it an actual function of I don't know what I'm doing and I can't get this straight? Or was it just that overwhelming feeling of why me? This isn't fair.
It was a lot of I don't want to throw my parents under the bus because they were fantastic and I love them dearly. But they, from day one, when I was admitted to the hospital, were like, this is your disease. You're going to learn how to take care of it. And at the time, I had no idea what that meant. Nobody does on day one.
Also, happy birthday.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
No, I mean, yeah, when you're 13,
Yeah, congratulations. Welcome to being a teenager.
Yeah. I know you thought you were getting a bike with a basket, but
yeah. In a way, it was a backward saving grace that my mom and my dad they were very supportive. Don't get me wrong. They would help me with anything I would have a question with, but they're like, this is your disease. You need to learn how to take care of yourself. And at 13,
that's too much.
You don't know anything. Yeah. You don't know anything. You don't know about yourself as a person. You don't know what you want to do in the next 10 hours minus, the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so the one thing I did not do after I left the hospital was my own injections. I did everything else, but I said I was absolutely not doing my own injections. And again, this was in 1995, way before pumps, way before CGMs. So I was totally cool with finger poking, looking at blood, all that stuff did not bother me.
The Dexcom G7 is sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, and it features a lightning fast 30-minute warm-up time. That's right. From the time you put on the Dexcom G7 till the time you're getting readings, 30 minutes. That's Pretty great. It also has a 12-hour grace period, so you can swap your sensor when it's convenient for you. All of that on top of it being small, accurate, incredibly wearable, and light. These things, in my opinion, make the Dexcom G7 a no-brainer. The Dexcom G7 comes with way more than just this. Up to 10 people can follow you. You can use it with type 1, type 2, or gestational diabetes. It's covered by all sorts of insurances. And this might be the best part. It might be the best part. Alerts and alarms that are customizable so that you can be alerted at the levels that make sense to you. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Dexcom and all of the sponsors. When you use my links, you're supporting the production of the podcast and helping to keep it free and plentiful. A lot of people in my private Facebook group talk about their love for Omnipod 5. And maybe you've seen those posts and thought, oh, I wish I could have that experience with an insulin pump too. Well, if you have thought that, you might be experiencing FOMO, fear of missing out on Omnipod. If you were experiencing FOMO, you'd have symptoms like wishing you could wear outfits without pockets and dreaming about walking past doorknobs and cabinet handles without getting your tubing caught. Have you perhaps fantasized about jumping into a swimming pool or a lake? Oh, a beautiful swim in a lake without disconnecting from your insulin pump first? If you've had those thoughts, you have FOMO, fear of missing out on Omnipod. But the good news is you don't have to suffer from FOMO any longer. You can see what you're missing by trying Omnipod 5 for yourself, and you can do that at my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. Throw away your FOMO, or your FOMO, or your fufu, or your you know what I'm saying. Just go to the link, omnipod.com/juicebox. And I don't want to hear from you people that said I said it wrong online. I hate that. Leave me alone.
Drawing up insulin, the needles themselves didn't bother me, but there was a mental block with doing the injection. I was like, nope, not doing it. And I'm so glad that my parents were supportive of that and that the medical team was supportive of that. They understood she's not ready to do this. We're not going to force her to do it.
Okay.
And I've never told my mom thank you for that. And I feel like I need to. So anybody who's got a parent that took care of them without pushing them, tell them thank you.
Yeah. My daughter has a fairly significant needle phobia.
Yeah, it doesn't go away.
Yeah. She pushes through it, but it's
hard.
Yeah, it's really something. And she's only, Arden's 19. She'll be 20 in 6 or 7 months. And yeah. I think she's given herself, besides before the phobia hit her, when she did it a handful of times as a little child, she's given herself one insulin injection.
Yeah.
And it took her an hour. It took her an hour.
Oh yeah. No, I've been there. I've been down that road. The thing that got me to understand I will have more freedom in my own personal life, as a 13-year-old, will be learning to do my own injections. And the catalyst for that, honestly, was going to diabetes camp and seeing 6 and 7-year-olds having no problem doing their own injection at the dinner table or the kitchen table, whatever, before dinner, and then going off and playing with their friends.
Yeah, you were like, I probably should be able to do this too, right?
Yeah, I'm this little kid that's literally half my age can do this, and it's not a huge deal to them. Why can't I do it?
Yeah.
And so it's like reverse peer pressure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we just did a thing. So Arden's using Ozempic, just a tiny bit. She's using like what they would even consider to be a non-therapeutic dose, ironically enough, 0.25 a week. And it's reduced her insulin needs significantly. The best way I've learned to explain to people by how much is that my calculations say that she'll use 11,000 fewer units of insulin in the coming year.
Wow. That's a lot.
If this keeps working the way it's insane, right? And so, nevertheless, it's an injection.
Right.
So we started it while she was home for the holidays, and we had to do it for her. And Arden doesn't just she's not just like this. She's like her ninja hands come out. She's like, get away, get away, get away, get away. No. And flop sweat, really upset. It's upsetting to her, right?
Yeah.
And but we got through it. And she toughed it out the first couple of weeks because there's, the side effects from Ozempic hit you. You feel too full in the beginning when you start taking it. It can feel like nausea to some people. You have trouble eating till your body gets used to it, etc. But her insulin needs literally started coming down in the first 4 days.
Hmm.
And so she saw the value in it. It helped her with her acne. Like, we think it's possible it could help her with PCOS symptoms that she has. There's a lot of value here, right?
Oh, wow.
And so we send her back to college with this pen and these needle calves. And I'm like, on Saturday, you've got to give this to yourself. And she's like, okay. Well, I made a plan. Like, she talked to her roommate. Her roommate said, I'll help you with it. Like, this whole thing. Saturday rolls around and her roommate is gone for the weekend.
Oh, no.
So my wife Kelly says, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm not going to mention it to her on Saturday. I was like, she's got to get this on her own. I was like, and I think the fact that she has to do it will lead to her doing it. And, so on Saturday, I said, hey, your blood sugars look a little weird. If you haven't shot that Ozempic, it's going to impact our settings. Let me know what you want to do. And I did not even ask her to respond to me. I just sent it to her so she knew that. And I know she knew, but I wanted to remind her. I did not quickly get back. And don't worry, I already shot the Ozempic. So I figured, all right, she's dealing with it. And Sunday comes and it's more towards the evening now. And I'm watching her blood sugars bounce around too much. And I'm like, I don't want to change her insulin because if I put her insulin back, she's going to stop taking the Ozempic, right? And I get a text maybe a couple hours later. I haven't taken that injection yet. And I said, okay, what's the plan? And she said, do I have to? And I said, yes. And she said, okay. And I said, do you want me to call you? And I never heard from her again. And about an hour and a half later, we get this video of her like in her dorm room giving herself this Ozempic injection.
Aw.
And she's
so happy for her.
Oh, I was thrilled for her. I really was. And she's FaceTiming with one of her like longtime best friends. And I can hear her in the background. She's like, Arj, you can do it. You're a groundbreaker. Let's go.
Aw.
Like, and Arden's like, what? And she goes, you're a groundbreaker. You're shooting Ozempic in your dorm room. You're like a Kardashian. Like, so assuming that this girl thinks the Kardashians are using a GLP. And so anyway, like there's this funny conversation going on. She puts it in. But the moment of elation after, like, she put the needle in and I heard her go, it's in. She almost said it like she was surprised. Mm-hmm. And then you saw on her face her go, I have to push the button. And she pushed the button. And then she's supposed to count to 10 afterwards. And she's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good enough. And she took it out.
Well, good for her.
But anyway, it's a thing I think that most people that know Arden, wouldn't believe that. Anytime you tell a doctor, like when she goes to the dentist, you're like, look, you might have to put her into a trance to take out this cavity. The doctors will always say the same thing, but she has type 1 diabetes. As if you having type 1 means you couldn't possibly have a needle phobia. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
You must not be afraid of needles anymore. No, that's not at all the case.
That's not how that works. Anyway, but my point of that whole story is I think we did in some way or another exactly what happened to you. We put you into a situation where it was literally sink or swim. You had to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny. Speaking of people not believing that, that thing wouldn't happen. When the camp counselors, my grandfather ended up passing away while I was at camp, and my mom had called to say, should we take her out? And the counselor was like, oh, no, she's doing great. She's doing her own injections and this, that. My mother's like, hold up, wait a minute. She did what? And they're like, yeah, she's doing her own injections twice a day. It's great. I was like, she wasn't doing that when we dropped her off a couple days ago. And they're like, well, she's doing great. So
excellent. Yeah,
camp is 1,000% recommended by me and probably any other person that's gone to diabetes camp. For anybody.
Yeah.
I wish they had diabetes camp for adults because I would go.
They have some stuff. Have you heard Connected in Motion does something for adults?
I saw them. Yeah. I think they're only in Canada, though.
Michigan. There's one in Michigan I know of. There's one in Toronto. I'm not sure where else. And Steven, who's a group expert in the Facebook group, I think he's involved with a pretty big adult group in California somewhere. They must exist is my point.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I would just have to do some research.
So you experienced burnout for the first time in high school. I'm not injecting. I'm not even looking at what I'm doing. Your blood sugars get very high. Do you give yourself insulin at some point during every day, or do you let it go days?
Well, at that point, yes, I was doing my own injections, and I would, my parents would help me dose because I think I was still on regular NPH back then. So I would have a breakfast injection and a dinner injection and then one at bedtime. So my mom would help me figure out, okay, well, we're having chicken and rice and a baked potato. We're going to have this many, carbs, dose for that. So, she would, be in one side of the kitchen and I would be at the kitchen table doing my insulin shot. And, she wouldn't be actively watching me do it, but she would just kind of be in the room. She would see I had all the stuff out, but she wouldn't I wouldn't give her the needle to double check that I was giving the right dose.
Okay.
So I would consistently underdose, or I would intentionally overdose by like 1 or 2 units, not a ton. So I could be like, oops, I'm low. Now I have to eat a whole package of cookies. My bad. Intentionally, shooting myself in the foot, so to speak. I knew, moving on when I was an adult living on my own, I had a live-in boyfriend at the time, and he knew about my diabetes, obviously, but he wasn't like super into it. He wasn't like actively helping me with my care.
Yeah.
So it was all on me. And I knew if I, when I went on burnout, same things happen. I would underdose or overdose, just, and deal with it later was my mentality. Just deal with it later. And me and this boyfriend ended up getting married. He's in the military. So we moved down here to Virginia, where I have no family. I barely just made some friends. And I could see myself approaching burnout again because I was overwhelmed with my husband being deployed. I was in a new location. I didn't have any really big support system with me here physically.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a lot going on. And I was like, I can't take care of diabetes right now. Like, other stuff has taken more importance in my brain than diabetes, when it really shouldn't. So a coworker of mine was like, you need to go to therapy. And I'm like, I don't need therapy. I'm fine.
I'm going to pray to Jesus later. My brother told me about it.
I'm great. I don't need therapy. I'm like, what's therapy going to do for me? I have diabetes. Only you need an endocrinologist and that's it. That was kind of my mentality. And she's like, no, you seem really stressed out. This therapist I've been seeing for X amount of years, she's really great. Call her up. So that's what I did. I called up this therapist. I looked on her website just to, check her credentials and all that. And, I was like, all right, I'll call him. I'll go sit with her for a meeting or whatever and see if it's something that she can help me with, because I'm thinking this practitioner knows nothing about diabetes. She has nothing on her website about treating diabetics or people with any sort of metabolic disorder. She's very much like a wellness coach more than a counselor, right? So I was like, she's not going to be able to help me, whatever. I call, make the appointment. I go in and I meet with her. She seems like a nice lady. And I sit down. She goes, okay, so tell me about yourself. Why are you here? And I broke down. And she's like I was like ugly crying the whole 9. And she says, okay, well, what's going on? And I was like, I have diabetes. It's so incredibly overwhelming. There's literally no way for me to explain it if you don't already have it. And I think a lot of people will understand me when I say that.
Of course.
There are so many things. And now, of course, I've been seeing this practitioner for 10, 12 years now. And I started seeing her. I went twice a week, every single week for months. And every single time I would go in there and crying. She'd be like, okay, we're going to break it down. What's the main thing that's giving you anxiety today? Not even tomorrow or last week or next week. What's doing it right now? And that kind of really helped me in a kind of obscure way to focus on what's going on right now that I can fix or work on, or what do I have control of in this situation immediately right now? Not thinking about an hour from now or a day from now, just what now?
Yeah. Were you able to accomplish that?
Yes. Going to therapy has been so overwhelmingly helpful for me. And again, going in, remember, I didn't think she could help me because she knew nothing about diabetes. She even told me herself, I don't know anything about diabetes, or I've never had a diabetic patient. And I'm like, great, this is going to go fantastically. But you
found out. I'm sorry. Let me say, you found out that your problems were about something that's more central, and the diabetes was the thing bringing it to the surface.
Yes, you could say that. Yeah, the diabetes was kind of like the catalyst to all of the other things.
Right.
And diabetes was kind of like the bullet point that I was like, this is why I'm here. Diabetes.
Yeah.
And she kind of saw through that probably immediately, that it's not just the diabetes. There's other things on the peripheral that are impacting that, because, when you get stressed, your blood sugars go high. When you get, overworked in your schedule, you don't have time to eat, your blood sugars go low. Everything affects your diabetes. And I wasn't even looking at it as that broad picture.
Mm-hmm.
I was just so overwhelmed with having to do my insulin shot, change my pump, make sure my prescriptions were up to date, making sure I had enough snacks in the car, making sure I had enough juice with me, making sure my friends knew where my glucagon was, all of these things.
Yeah, and your coping skills weren't there for that stuff.
I didn't have any.
Yeah.
You could be fair to say I had no coping skills because I was never taught any. That wasn't a thing to be taught at my diagnosis or even through all of the practitioners I had seen. None of my educators talked about coping skills. They talked about how to take care of your diabetes, but not how to cope with living with it. And those are two different things.
Yeah, Libby, I think it's funny to say, not funny, it's haha, but I think it's funny. It's funny to say I wasn't taught coping skills because I think of it more like between whoever someone's parents are and the experiences that the person goes through, you were never put into moments, situations, experiences where something happened and then a learned person guided you through it.
Right.
Because that's what teaching it is. I think it's possible people could think, oh yeah, I probably should sit my 8-year-old down and teach them coping skills. It's not math.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Even on that level, the household that I grew up with, as fantastic as it was, a very nuclear family. My dad had severe anxiety and depression, undiagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Holidays were a mess in my house. Like, leave dad alone. He's having his Jack Daniels and whatever else, watching football. Nobody go in that room. Just leave him alone. And then my mom would be anxious and stressed because she's having to host everybody coming to the house. So coping skills for me was like, get totally freaked out and either internalize it or ignore it, compartmentalize it.
And
don't deal with it.
And you stress ate too. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
1,000%.
And then with diabetes, and then that puts that whole chain of events into a.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a whole bunch of good stuff.
And that's something. I mean, it's very obvious, right? Like it's how it goes.
Yeah. Looking back on it now, it is 1,000% obvious. And I if I had gone to a different practitioner, things could have been different or not. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I've only been to this one practitioner.
Well, also, Libby, this isn't me throwing your parents under the bus. I think it's just an obvious reflection of the conversation. But I don't imagine that your dad, with his own anxiety and everything, heard that you had type 1 diabetes and thought, oh, I could definitely handle this.
Oh, no, he definitely didn't.
Yeah.
The first time that he had to try to give me a shot, he broke down in tears.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
Because he didn't want to hurt me. And I'm like, why is dad crying? Now I'm going to cry. And then my mom got upset because my dad was crying and he needed to be like focused and serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the nurse had to like shuffle my mom out of the room so mom wasn't causing more stress and anxiety on my dad. And it was a hot mess.
Libby, it took you about 5 to 6 minutes to get your microphone set up when we should have been recording. So our episode's going to be a little shorter, but I bring it up only because in that time you apologized to me a half a dozen times. Yeah,
that's been a long-term, lifelong thing. I over apologize for a lot.
Yeah. No, actually, it's funny. I hadn't opened up your show notes. The notes that you sent people, like, here's what you said. I actually signed up to do an interview for mental health, seeking counseling due to anxiety, stress, due to T1D. Well, and you put some more in here, but I hadn't looked at that yet while we were setting up.
Mm-hmm.
And the second time you apologized, I said, oh, this is going to be about anxiety.
What gives it away?
Yeah. I'm like, what are you sorry for? And you're like, you didn't say, oh, I guess this happens to everybody. You said, I'm sorry again. I was like, oh God, yeah. She's now apologizing because I asked her why she was apologizing. It's very natural. So my point is, if your father had all that going on, he's like, what do I say that I'm sure he loves you. So he's like, what do I say to help her? This is your disease. You got to take care of yourself. Yeah. And your mom hears your dad say that and go, okay, those are the marching orders. That's what we're doing. And by the way, she's over here rowing the boat on both sides, it sounds like. So like, she doesn't have time for your diabetes. She's keeping you, your father, her, your household, and any other brothers and sisters you might have. It's on her, right? And so she does the same thing, which sounds, by the way, on its surface, it's your disease. You need to learn to take care of it. It seems like a very reasonable thing to say.
Right. And it's not unreasonable to say to somebody, you need to learn how to take care of yourself. But it's like the way it's said and how it's received, I think people internalize that completely differently.
Also, it's in the 90s. And where were you going to go to find ages. Where were you going to the library to figure this out?
It's funny because my educator that we had was this fantastic educator. She was super blunt, like to the point, did not have any time for BSing around or, screwing around. She's like, you have diabetes now. Your pancreas doesn't make insulin. This does this. This does this. You need insulin shots for this, this, and this. And she drew little pictures on these handouts that must have been from like the 70s. And that was our Bible. That was our go-to. Like even the food that I had, my daily like nutrition plan was, I could have 2 breads at breakfast, 1 fruit, 1 fat, and 1 free food. And nobody knows what that is anymore.
Yeah. Also,
we do carbs now.
Also, that to your parents was figuring it out.
Yeah.
Because
we as a family had to figure out a lot, and it was so stressful on everybody.
If back then, I know the 90s doesn't sound like it's that long ago, but for diabetes, it really was.
Mm-hmm.
If back then the idea was, you're on the exchange diet and then you do the math or not even math, you do the amount of injections that the doctor told you. None of that means that you were doing well.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that your blood sugars aren't vacillating all over the place, that you're not, by the way, your anxiety is not being pushed up by that, or just the knowledge of I feel high or I feel low or I don't know what I'm doing or I don't feel like doing this or what. All that stuff to your parents doesn't look real because they think you're injecting when you're supposed to, and that's all you're supposed to be doing. Now you move forward 30 years and we all have these monitors and we know what's going on, and you realize that you weren't really addressing 10% of what you needed to look into.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not throwing your parents under the bus. They were doing exactly what they thought, and they were protecting their own selves, because if your dad jumps out a window, he can't pay for the house. So
right.
That's what's going on really. And then obviously the anxiety thing is passed to you. Do you believe it was?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's what I grew up around. That was my learned coping skill, was to be anxious about things. And I didn't even have a word for it until I got to therapy at, how old was I? My late 20s, early 30s. I knew what anxiety was, but I was like, oh, those symptoms aren't me. I don't have anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was describing like my daily routine to this new therapist, she was like, sounds like you're pretty anxious about a lot of things all the time. And I'm like, am I though? And she was like, well, yeah, you always have to carry around your mom purse, that you call it, with all your snacks and your low treatments and your extra insulin pump supplies and your blood sugar kits and this. And she's like, you have a physical manifestation of your anxiety in your purse that you carry with you everywhere. And I'm like, dang it, she does know.
But Libby, that's interesting, because you do need to carry those things with you. So but is there a way to do it without it making you feel anxious that you're doing it?
Right. It got to the point where like my anxiety got so bad that I felt I couldn't go anywhere without my bag.
Oh, I see.
And so it's not that my bag was a safety net or a safety blanket or anything. That was because if something happens to me, nobody's going to know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, I not only didn't have trust in being able to handle myself, but I didn't have trust in anybody else to be able to handle me if I had an emergency.
See, the problem is, Libby, that's all very realistic. So
I know.
but the key is to live in it better.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I know I can go out and run 6 errands and just bring my wallet with me and I'm fine. I know I will be okay.
You have a juice in your car or something?
Oh, yeah. I have tons of stuff in my car. And now I also have a sensor. When I started going to therapy, I didn't have a CGM. So I had no idea what my trends were doing. I had no idea, other than how I physically felt, no idea if I was going high, if I was going low, if I.
Also, you're wearing the Control IQ.
Yes.
Which
did not exist back then.
Right. But let me ask you about it now, because Arden's, wears an algorithm. And it's my finding generally that for my daughter, that if her settings are very good and we're doing the things that we know to do, even if she tries to get low, the algorithm does a pretty good job of at least stopping it by 50.
Yes.
As a blood sugar. And that there's some comfort in that.
There
First
is.
of all, to know that they'll be beeping beforehand, and that even if it gets low, the likelihood of hey, I'm going over low is much lesser with these technologies.
Yes.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to get used to the algorithm, because prior to my tandem pump, I was on an Animas pump. And then before that, I was on the Omnipod, like the original Omnipod.
Yeah.
And before that, back in the early 2000s, I was on a Medtronic Mini-Med 508, which maybe a handful of your the folks that listen might know what that is. People bring up the
Mini-Med still. They know it. you know which one's not mentioned as much anymore that used to be all the time? Animas Ping.
Oh, I have a friend that was on that, and she was so mad that
they were all
went
very
out of
pissed
business.
when it went out of business. But I don't hear people mention it as much anymore. So anyway,
So going on, I mean, when I started Tandem, I went on the basal IQ and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And when they dropped the info about the control IQ, I was like, okay, that seems pretty cool. I want to try it. So I think I applied to be in their beta test program and they put me in it. And it took me a very long time to trust that the system would work how I needed it to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't feel, for a long time, I didn't feel comfortable with an overnight low at 120, like a low threshold. I was more comfortable with a low threshold at like 150. And my reasoning behind that is because I actually had a severe low while I was sleeping in where I needed to have glucagon. So I tend to prefer to be a little bit higher. And for me, 150 is not that high.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw that the Tandem pump for the sleep mode, at least, it raises your low threshold to, I think it's 110 or 120. And I was like, that feels really, really low to me, but I'll try it. And it's fine now. I do not have any lows overnight. And if I do, it's because I dose too much bolus at dinner.
For a meal still. Yeah.
For meals. And that is a clear, reason. This is, you went low because you gave 40 units of insulin instead of 20 or whatever the case is,
Right,
you know?
Did you end up dealing with the stress eating? Have you gotten that into a place where you're happy about it, how it works?
Yes. I mean, I still do it from time to time, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. Now I kind of sit down before I kind of look at my pantry. I want to eat this and this. Am I eating because I'm hungry, or am I eating because I'm bored or I'm stressed or I'm sad? Like, why do I want to go in my pantry or my fridge or my freezer to grab whatever it is?
Yeah.
And I've caught myself now, I've had to teach myself to stop and think about what I'm doing, because for me, a lot of the times it was just automatic, go grab something and eat it. Not even look at what it is, just grab something.
Yeah.
And now I'll be like, okay, if I want to eat something, it's like, if I know I'm eating because I'm bored, okay, well, maybe instead of eating, a bunch of Triscuits and cheese, maybe just have some carrots, because those, are a little bit more healthier than Triscuits and cheese, or, a donut or whatever. So I'm still like feeding that craving of being bored and hungry, but I'm giving it a better option, if that makes sense.
It happens. Listen, I use Zepbound for weight loss. I was using Wegovy. Now I'm using Zepbound. I had plateaued on Wegovy. And in the middle of the fourth quarter of watching the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely the bed last night, I grabbed a handful of potato chips that were in my house. I don't even like, they were salt and vinegar. They're not something I even particularly enjoy. And I had a couple, and then it hit me. I was like, what am I doing? I was like, I don't, and I rolled the bag back up and I put it back in the thing. But I think I was able to do that because that craving feeling and the satisfaction that comes from food doesn't exist as much on those GLP medications. And so I was able to have a couple of them and go, what am I doing? This is stupid. And I put it back. But it was like a knee-jerk reaction when I wasn't paying quite attention to what I was thinking or what I was doing. There was a commercial. I got up, I took a lap around the kitchen, and I was like, oh, and I grabbed this food. And I was like, I don't even want this. So I know how you feel. And geez, well, I'm glad you worked on it. Did it ever impact your weight?
I don't personally think it has. My weight's pretty plateau, pretty, within 5 pounds. It stayed pretty standard or plateaued, I guess. No, when I was seeing my pediatric endocrinologist, I remember he sat down with me and my mom at one clinic appointment. He's like, I don't think your blood sugars are matching what your food logs are showing me. And I'm like, uh-oh, here it comes. Mm-hmm. So he, had a very frank conversation with my mom and I about both of our eating habits, because, you learn from your parents.
Yeah.
And my mom admits, she's like, yeah, I go throughout the day and I'll grab some chips or some crackers or, whatever is just hanging around. And while she's vacuuming or doing laundry, she'll have a handful of chips and crackers. He's like, oh, so you guys are just a family of grazers.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, okay, I like that, being called a grazer instead of, a fat kid, or you need to lose weight. Or so my pediatric endocrinologist didn't necessarily shame me per se for eating so much, which may be a good or a bad thing. But it was, as I got older, it's like, you might want to start looking at, losing a couple of pounds. Mm-hmm. And of course, the doctors are always trying to be very, kind about how they say that, especially to a female. And so that is always on my mind. But I certainly know as the years have gone by, with me getting these tools from my therapist about managing my anxiety and my stress and stuff, that my just random grazing eating has lessened quite a bit.
Yeah.
Which is good. I mean, it's good to be aware of that. That's a problem spot. because a lot of people don't notice it.
Yeah. So you think yours is more psychological than physiological?
Definitely.
Yeah.
The physiological one is for my lows. For that, when I have a low, I feel like I'm dying if I don't eat everything. But I think that's pretty standard across the board for most of diabetics.
Yeah. How low do you have to get before you feel that way?
I actually start feeling my lows pretty high. I feel them around like 80 or 75.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, the algorithm's going to kick in. It will turn my basal off. I'll be fine. And the next time I look at it and it's 65 and I'm like, oh my God, I need to eat everything.
Does that feeling, is it the number that makes you think that, or is it the physical feeling?
It's different every time, honestly. Like sometimes my low symptoms are super, super intense. And I will feel like I don't have a brain in my head. And the only thing that I'm laser focused on is getting food in my mouth.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. And other times in my low, I'm like, I could use some crackers. I'll be fine. So it's so weird. And I'm sure other people have that similar, thing happen. But it's like there's no consistency to, if I'm 65, my symptoms will always be this and I will always feel this way.
Right.
I've never noticed it to be consistent every, back to back.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I would wonder, it's hard in that moment, but if it says 65, but you have that crushed feeling like I wonder if a finger stick wouldn't tell you were lower.
Yeah.
That was just all I was wondering.
Right.
Okay. All right. I want to keep going because you're short on time. You're going to a doctor's appointment today. So we have to,
Yes,
we have to get you moving. You listen to the podcast?
I have a couple of times. My friend actually recommended, she had one of her podcasts recorded a while ago, and I guess she just shared it with me like a month or so ago, and she's like, hey, listen to this. I'm like, oh.
You thought, I'd like to do this too.
I think I had heard about the Juicebox podcast, but I'm not a big podcaster to start with. So I was like, oh, I think I've heard of this. And then I was like, oh, there's a Facebook group. There's so many things.
Are you in the group?
I am in the group.
Excellent. Libby, by the way, not to call you out, but I'm the podcaster. You're the podcast listener. Yeah. You want to know something I won't go deep into, but I know for certain I've created a lot of new podcast listeners. There are a lot of people listening to this that if they open up their podcast app, it's basically a Juicebox podcast app and there's nothing else in there. I do think I found a group of people who otherwise would not have been listening.
Right. Well, I mean, honestly, there's not a lot of support, at least from my perspective. I have not seen a lot of support in general for type 1s. Doesn't matter if you're a pediatric patient, an adult patient, a long timer that's been in, diabetes land for 50 plus years. Sure, there's your clinic, but there's so little support out there.
Yeah.
And so having it in a podcast or a Facebook group or, if you're lucky enough to be in an area that has an in-person meeting, you are so blessed.
Yeah, you just don't know, right?
You really don't know.
It's one of those things that when you need it, it needs to be there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I honestly wish that all of this stuff had been around when I was a kid, specifically when I was a teenager, because I was the only diabetic in my middle school. I was one of 2 diabetics in my high school. I was the only diabetic in my college until my senior year when there was another girl who was on a pump showed up. The few friends that I have that are type 1s are from camp, and I love them. They know who they are, and I love them desperately.
I hear that story all the time. Well, hopefully you'll meet people online that are valuable, and you can be valuable for them as well.
I hope so.
Yeah. No, I hope so too. The group is fantastic. I'm very proud of it. And it's unexpected from my perspective, how well it helps people. I never thought it would. I mean, I did it because people asked. They were like, can we have a Facebook group to talk about the podcast? And by the way, the least of what they do in there is talk about the podcast. It's pretty funny, but it's cool. It's just grown. It's got I think it's almost to 46,000 members. And then by the time,
a little group.
Yeah. And by the time this comes out and you check it, it'll be like 50,000. You'll be like, oh, he said 46 in the podcast, but it grows crazy. 150 people every 4 days. And it just keeps adding and adding and adding. But anyway, I'm glad your friend shared the show with you. What else should we be talking about that I'm speeding you up because you're short on time? Is there anything we're missing?
Totally fine. I did want to mention one big thing that my counselor therapist gave me to clue in about my anxiety, and I'm sure it will be helpful for others. Take it if you want it, and if not, just leave it there. And she was like, when you have anxiety, you're thinking about something happening in the future. And when that thing actually happens, you're concerned about it doubly because you've already worried yourself over it once, now in the past, and now you're worrying about it again when it's in front of you. So here's a perfect example.
Go ahead.
On the few random occasions where I have to do MDI, multiple injections because my pump broke or I'm taking a pump vacation, whatever, I have to psych myself up to do my injections. Now, that anxiety might be an hour ahead of my injection, or it might be the whole day before my injection. But putting myself through that anxiety, but worrying about, oh, I got to do the shot, I have to do this needle, I have to do this, that, oh, it's making me anxious, whatever. Putting myself through that anxiety before I even have to do the thing is making me go through it twice. Because as soon as I have to start getting my vials ready to get my insulin in the syringe, I've got anxiety there already. It's there, it's at the table with the vials of insulin.
Yeah.
So I've already wasted so much energy getting anxious about this thing that's happening in the future. Why am I doing that? Why am I wasting that energy, that precious energy to me that is already taken up by all the technology and all of the monitoring, the beeps, the sounds, everything? Why am I spending all this energy getting anxious over something I know is either definitely going to happen or I don't know is definitely going to happen? And I think that second thing is really, really hard for a lot of people to kind of internalize or understand. Because, thinking in the future, we don't know if our kids in a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, if they're going to be without complications due to their diabetes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people feel guilt if their kid has a consistently higher A1C or if they are running all over the roadmap on any particular day. And what I have to say to that is, as a diabetic, that is for quote unquote normal. To have a completely straight line or a line with very little hills and bumps in it, I wish I could have that. I so wish.
Tell me, if you would, what's your A1C?
My last one was 6.6.
There's nothing bad about that.
No, and for a long, long time, I was stuck at 8.8. And my highest A1C, I think, back when I was a teenager was like 11 or 12.
Let me say this to you. Try the Pro Tip series in the podcast, episode 1000 to 1026. Just listen to those and then send me an email in 6 months when you tell me your A1C is 6.1.
I'll have to do that.
It's just little, because I don't think about diabetes like do this, do that. I think of it as tools that you just know when to pull out. And you don't have to think about them. And I think that for somebody like you who's had type 1 for 30 years, first of all, a 6.6 is insanely good.
I know. It surprises me every time I get that result back. I'm like, how is this possible?
And everything you said, I was nodding along with right until you said, well, but this is how diabetes is. Because if you really know how to use the insulin and your settings are very rock solid, it's not like that for everybody.
Right. Well, everybody's different, and
they are. And Libby, I'm not arguing with you that everybody's different. But there is a lot to that. Everyone's different. And that's just diabetes. That feeling, it's a lot more about using insulin at the right time. Like, I take your greater point. There are spikes and you'll get higher blood sugars that stick for a while. And that is part of the game. You just, I don't think unless you're going to eat a very ultra low carb lifestyle that you're going to see, a stable 80 to 100 your whole day. Right.
Right.
I do know that's your point. But I get concerned when people hear that what they think is, oh, spikes are okay. And then they'll see one at 200 and they'll go, this is okay. Someone told me it was okay. And it's okay if it stays
I would certainly not condone that. I mean,
yeah.
I've sometimes looked at other people's ranges and my range is 70 to 120. I'm like, that's really, really tight. Like, how do you have the time to manage that?
So, Libby, my daughter's range on my phone is 70 to 120. On her phone, it's 70 to 130. And we don't think about diabetes hardly at all.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's just the stuff that's in that Pro Tip series.
Right. And I'm sure it also could be because, this is what I was taught 20 years ago. So this is my baseline from what I learned back in the dark ages of no technology, no tools, nothing. 2 different kinds of insulin that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah. I'd be super interested to hear back from you if you did listen to that.
Yeah, I'll do that.
And trust me, it's not like you're going to take a test or, something. Just listen to the podcast when you get a chance and, listen to those episodes. Start at episode 1000. You'll see them there. And, tell me if if a couple months later, it's not different for you. And if it isn't, great. Tell me that too. But send me an email and let me know. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I could certainly do that.
Yeah, no, I think it would be an interesting experiment because you do know what you're doing and you are doing a great job. And yet you still have some of the older, oh, you're very welcome. But you still have some of the older thoughts in your head.
Oh, definitely. And I don't deny that. Not even a little bit.
I think I could push those thoughts out of your head. Actually, if you were my kid, Libby, which would be weird because I would have had you when I was 11. But if you were, can you imagine me? Just a studly little 11-year-old out there? I don't see it. But if you were my kid, I would have taught you that worry is a waste of imagination.
Oh, and I agree with you 100%.
And that would have been good for you to know, especially because that whole thing you talked about what your therapist told you, you're not wrong, huh? You had to go to a professional to get something that I told my kid.
Right.
Yeah. That when you worry about something, you are literally making up a story about something that may or may not ever happen.
Yep.
And that nothing we do today changes whether or not that thing happens later. I'll tell you where I feel bad for people. The diabetes prepping.
Oh, yeah.
Where I actually saw somebody the other day say, I have been stockpiling our insulin for when things get upside down.
That used to be me.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. If things get that upside down, we're all dead. Not just because you have diabetes.
100%.
Don't worry about it. You'll just go a couple months earlier. So and by the way, the world's been here a really long time, and everything's not falling apart. And when it does, if it does, you're not stopping it.
Yeah.
And you'll never put aside enough needles and pens and insulin and you just won't. This is a fact of life. But instead of being upset by that, I embrace it. I'm like, yeah. Like,
embrace the suck, as the Army says.
Yeah. My daughter came to me one time, this is years ago, and we were talking, I think it's probably back when zombie television shows were very popular. And she goes, hey, if this really happened, what happens to me? And I turned to her and I said, you'll be dead pretty quick. And she's like, yeah, right. And I was like, well, I said, in honesty, we'd overhydrate you if we could. We'd give you an ultra low carb existence. But I mean, it seems like we'd probably all be on an ultra low carb existence because no food and everything. I'm like, but we'd keep you very low carb. We'd manage you like it was before 1922. And we'd see how long we could keep you going. I'm like, but yeah, I don't know, Arden, month, 2, maybe.
Yeah.
And she found the knowledge freeing, not because, by the way, because zombies aren't coming, but she found the knowledge freeing. She's like, okay, that's how it'll end. I'm like, and I'll be dead 3 days later. I'll be sad you're gone. I'll forget the zig and zag. A zombie will chew on my arm and I'll be right behind you. Don't worry about it. And I said, but I won't let you turn into a zombie. And she goes, thanks. Anyway, that worry is a waste of imagination. Really diagnose those words, pull them apart, and really feel what they mean. You are imagining something going wrong. It's not something that's absolutely going to happen, and you're trying to prepare for it.
Yeah, and what you think about, you bring about. So if you only want good, positive things to come about in your life, that's what you got to think about. Think about fantastic blood sugars or a cure eventually. Lord help. Oh God, I hope so.
Libby, you and I would have gotten along really well. You know what I usually say to people? You get what you expect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Generally speaking, that is true.
Yep.
So, yeah, but you learned all those things from a therapist.
Yep.
I could have told you if you would have come here and hung out for a bit, Libby. That's okay. I really appreciate you doing this. Will you share what kind of doctor's appointment you're going on, or is it not diabetes related?
Actually, it's not diabetes related, but I don't mind sharing if anybody cares.
Yeah, let's see. Maybe it's something fun. What is it?
I'm actually going to see a genetic counselor because due to my mom's breast cancer she had back in 2009, I'm considered high risk.
Okay.
So the genetic counselor, I'm assuming, is going to tell me, what sort of markers that I might have in my body or might not.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to ask him if I have the markers for getting diabetes, because that's something that's always been very...
No one's ever given you a C-peptide?
Oh, I've gotten that before. The last one I got was years ago, and it was like, you got 0 C-peptides. I'm like, fantastic.
I'm sure you have. I mean, you're type 1. You. I'm going to guess you're going to have them. Good luck. Yeah. Good luck getting your insurance to cover that, by the way.
Yeah, we'll see.
but and by the way, good for you doing this.
Yeah.
It's a brave thing to do and proactive, and I think it's terrific.
My mom is a very brave woman, and she went through hell, and I hope that I don't have to go through what she did. So if I can do anything to keep that from happening, I will do it.
My mom passed away recently from cancer, and
I'm so sorry.
No, I appreciate that. You don't want cancer if you can avoid it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate this very much. We didn't get to dig into all the fun things. This would have been so much more fun if we had more time. Like when you said my boyfriend who was my husband, I was like, oh, I'd love to hear about that, but we didn't have time.
Well, I'd be happy to do another podcast with you if you wanted.
Libby, raise your right hand to God, the one who's going to save you when you pray to him, and tell him that you're going to listen to the Pro Tip series, then live your life for 3 months, then send me an email.
I will do that.
And then we'll get you back on.
Sounds great.
Libby, I
We'll
really
make a date
enjoyed
of
you.
it.
I really enjoyed you. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks. You too, Scott.
Bye. Today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Dexcom G7, which now integrates with the Tandem T-Slim X2 system. Learn more and get started today at dexcom.com/juicebox. A huge thanks to Omnipod, not just my longest sponsor, but my first one. Omnipod.com/juicebox. If you love the podcast and you love tubeless insulin pumps, this link is for you. Omnipod.com/juicebox. I know that Facebook has a bad reputation, but please give the private Facebook group for the Juicebox Podcast a healthy once-over. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. The group now has 47,000 members in it. It gets 150 new members a day. It is completely free, and at the very least, you can watch other people talk about diabetes. And everybody is welcome. Type 1, Type 2, gestational, loved ones, everyone is welcome. Go up into the featured tab of the private Facebook group, and there you'll see lists upon lists of all of the management series that are available to you for free in the Juicebox Podcast. Becoming a member of that group, I really think it will help you. It will at least give you community. You'll be able to kind of lurk around, see what people are talking about, pick up some tips and tricks. Maybe you can ask a question or offer some help. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. If you or a loved one was just diagnosed with Type 1 diabetes and you're looking for some fresh perspective, the Bold Beginnings series from the Juicebox Podcast is a terrific place to start. That series is with myself and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a CDCES, a registered dietitian, and a Type 1 for over 35 years. And in the Bold Beginnings series, Jenny and I are going to answer the questions that most people have after a Type 1 diabetes diagnosis. The series begins at episode 698 in your podcast player, or you can go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on Bold Beginnings in the menu. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.